I'm Anil Kumar sharing with you a very simple question which is extremely difficult to answer. It's based on characteristics of function. For each pair of functions, give a characteristic that two functions have in common and a characteristic that distinguishes them. The first one is f of x equals to x and g of x equals to sine x. The other one is f of x equals to 1 over x and g of x equals to square root of x. So let's try to figure out their similarities and differences. Now when we talk about f of x equals to x and g of x equals to sine x, we know x, this is a linear function which is kind of like this, and sine x is a sine wave, right? Now looking into these functions, what are their similarities? Well, one of the similarities is that their domain is same, right? So we say domain of these functions is x belongs to real numbers. So that is definitely a similarity. Can you tell me one additional similarity? That's kind of tricky, correct? Well, both are odd functions. That is the second similarity between these two. Let me also list, so that makes two similarities. Well, it's really difficult to find other similarities between these two functions. Now let's find differences. Well, there are many differences, right? So let's list the ones which you think are kind of distinguishing them. One I should say is range. Now, as far as the range is concerned, for linear functions, it is y belongs to real numbers, but for the sine wave, it is restricted from both the sides. It is between plus and minus 1, right? So that is a good distinguishing feature between these two. The other feature which I find very interesting is number of zeros, or x-intercepts, so number of zeros. So for the linear function, we have only one zero, and here we have infinite zeros. And one of the other distinguishing features could be the end behavior, right? So end behavior is very different. You can list details of end behavior. For example, for linear function, as x approaches positive infinity, y approaches positive infinity. As x approaches negative infinity, y approaches negative infinity. How about sine x? You can't really say. It is any value between its range of minus 1 and plus 1. It oscillates. So these are very interesting differences between the two given functions. I hope you appreciate them. Now let's look into the most difficult question here. F of x is a reciprocal function. G of x is square root function, right? So this function is kind of like this, right? It helps when you sketch a function so that you can, really figure out the similarities. If you see, there are no similarities actually between these two functions. But just to find few, we can say both these functions will go through the point 1, 1. Reciprocal of 1 is also 1, and square root of 1 is also 1. So that is one similarity I can say. The other similarity is that for x greater than 0, f of x is also greater than 0 for both the functions, right? So these are definitely two similarities, right? As far as the differences are concerned, we can list many differences between these two functions, right? So one of the differences could be that the given function, reciprocal function, is an odd function, right? So the reciprocal is odd function whereas the square root function is neither, right? As far as similarity uh, goes, right? This is neither for square root function and odd for 1 over x. Let me just divide this. Okay. The other differences could be in their domain, right? So their domain is so very different. So domain is for reciprocal function. It is x belongs to real numbers where x is not equal to 0. However, for the square root function, domain includes 0, right? It is x belongs to real numbers where x is greater than equal to 0, right? 0 is not included in the reciprocal function, but it is included in the square root function. One of the similarities you could say here is both functions do not have all real numbers in their domain, right? So that way they are similar, that they are restricted in some way or the other. So we can add one more here, is domain is restricted. May be different, right? But domain is restricted. So that is how we can find some, very few similarities, but it's kind of critical and important to list them. I hope you understand and appreciate. Thank you and all the best.